Just a brief of history on Bill. Even though he's obviously a great storyteller of the Western spirit through his art, he hails from Illinois, which is, I don't know. I'm a Wisconsin kid, so Illinois is, we'll take him. But he hails from Illinois, and he came to the West as a youngster and fell in love with it at a very early age. Came back to college to go to Northern Arizona University, and he has never left. And we are so delighted that he has not left. He is a treasure, not just for Arizona, but truly all of the American West. So Bill's here today to share with you, talk with you about the art. We want to encourage questions right off the bat if you'd like to do that. So without further ado, I give to you, Mr. Bill Anton.
Thanks again. This has been a lot of fun. This whole process down here has been great. This is a wonderful place. And can you hear me okay? Yeah. Okay. Just a little bit of background. I'll keep it brief. Also, I am not a lecturer. And when you have questions, stand up, raise your hand. Doesn't matter what I'm talking about. Let's just keep it real, informal, and conversational. Just real briefly, as Dan said, I was born in a suburb of Chicago. And in 1964, my folks took me out west for the first time, which really just changed my life. It was kind of unusual for a 7-year-old kid to look at something and know there's something that grabbed me by the throat. Saw the showcase places of the West, Glacier Park. I woke up one morning in Glacier Park, and I don't think I was really ever the same. And I remember asking my dad, "What do you live in Chicago for?" And it was 1964, he had his own business. He said, "Well, you can't make a living out here," which, is not exactly true, but he couldn't just pick up and leave, and never did. But I spent the next 12 years of my life trying to figure out how to get out of Illinois. I wasn't, miserable, but I knew that I couldn't be there and feed my spirit. So when I was 19, 12 years later, my father passed away, and there was really nothing holding me anymore. And I was in my second year at Loyola University in Chicago, and I went to the counselor and I said, "Get me out of here." And he said, "Well, what?" I want to go out west. I don't ski, and the school year is under snow in Montana and some of those other beautiful places. And I said, "Get me someplace. Do you know of any place where I could transfer?" And he said, "Well, there's a nice little school up in Flagstaff, Arizona." And I had never been to Arizona. I didn't know what to expect. But he said, "It's right in the middle of the world's largest ponderosa pine forest." And I thought, well, that sounds interesting. And I went and I looked at the school and I transferred. I didn't know a soul. But I left home and went there, and through a series of events, got a couple of different jobs that in one way or another connected me with the ranching community in Flagstaff. A lot of guys that were connected out on the Babbitt Ranch. And I was just interested in that. And I finished up school. I got a degree in English because I thought I was going to go into my father's business, which my brother was running at the time. And it was a small food brokerage business. And I thought, I'll go into that business and I'll try to make a few bucks and maybe see if I can worm my way into art. Now, when I was little, I was drawing a lot. And I have vivid memories of kids standing around my desk when I was drawing in second grade and stuff like that. So I guess it was a little bit unusual that I was that advanced. But I didn't know anybody making a living in art. Now my sister, I'm the youngest of 5, and there's about a 15-year spread in the family. And my oldest sister married a commercial artist when I was about 6 years old. And so I got to see up close a real artist. And he had some serious talent, and he was particularly good at watercolor, which I still have no idea how to handle. But I saw some serious talent. I saw people manipulating paint, and I thought, well, this is really interesting. And I was interested in art, and I was interested in the West, And by the time I got to Flagstaff, those two just married. And I started hanging out with some of the guys that were out at the ranches, it was really sort of the hand of God, just dovetailed everything. Long about that time, I think I was a senior at NAU, and I met an Arizona girl, 5th generation. Well, after graduation, I went back to Chicago. I lasted 6 months. And I sat down with my brother and my mom, and I said, I've met Peggy. I don't want to be here anymore. I don't want to come back here. I'm just going to move. I'm just going to go full-time to Flagstaff. I'm going to stay there. And we got married. And I was bussing tables or something when I first went back to Flagstaff. And then I got a job at a radio station, which introduced me to some of the people that I was going to get to know better, who were working the ranches and things like that. In 1982, Peggy and I got married. Now, I wasn't making anything at that job anyway. And Peggy and I both sat down together and realized, look, if we're going to make a jump into fine art, if you think you really want to do this, the time to do it is not after you already established you have kids and mortgage and all of that stuff. The time to do it is when you don't have anything to lose. And I didn't have anything to lose. We didn't have anything to lose in 1982. But imagine marrying somebody and quitting your job 2 weeks later. Peggy came from an upper middle class family, and I didn't even think twice about doing something stupid like that. She was all for it, completely behind me in this, but it didn't dawn on me until about 20 years ago. I've been painting now for 40 years almost. I think this May will be 40 years. But about 20 years ago, it dawned on me, that really must have made my in-laws nervous. And so I went to them and I said, because they never said anything. I said, did that bother you when I did that? And they said, oh yeah. Well, they were remarkable. They never said a word. And maybe they saw that I was sort of an A-type personality and that I was not going to put Peggy through, 10 years of struggle and alcoholism and all of that stuff before I just chasing my dreams. So I knew that nothing is as easy or takes as a short amount of time as you think that it should. So I was sort of well prepared that this was going to be work, and more work. And you had to be very, very careful about your finances. Now, again, we didn't have anything to lose because we didn't own anything. So Peggy had a job at an art supply store, interestingly enough, in Flagstaff. And she was bringing in the steady money, and I was just lining up commissions and selling things where I could. Nobody talks about this one thing. Now, I know that artists are supposed to be free spirits, and they're supposed to be very impractical, and you just lose yourself in what you're doing and hang the rest of the world. Well, I came from a Midwestern background, very conservative, and you just didn't do stuff like that. So I had a pretty clear idea that I was going to have to figure out a way to make this work and make it work in fairly short order, or at least get some encouraging things going on and know that I was headed in the right direction. What nobody tells you about this thing is that if you don't have or build up a little bit of a war chest, especially if you don't have any training, and I had no training at all, you're never going to get the chance to get better. And that's what this was all about, trying to get better and learn and explore and find out, how does a guy do this? How do you get better? How do you improve? But if you're always worried about, let's say there's dips and flows and ebbs in the art market, which there always is. And I knew that I had to stay focused like a laser on my subject matter and what I wanted to do. And I did not want to have to follow any sort of trends. In other words, if cowboy art or Western art it wasn't selling at the same clip that it once was, I did not want to have to worry about that. I didn't want to have to go start painting shrimp boats or mountain men or whatever it was. I wanted to stay focused on what I did, so we were very careful, and we lived off Peggy's income, and we banked mine all the time. I first met Matt Smith, I think about 1990, and he was tearing it up, and he was really doing well. And he came up to me, we were sort of gotten into this at about the same time, and he said, "Do you have any advice for me?" This is 32 years ago. And I said, "Yeah, if you ever get your hands on any money, bank it." Because we can't afford, in this line of work, to live at our means. You just can't do that. You don't, sell something for $1,500 and then go buy a $1,200 saddle. That's not a smart thing to do. You've got to, because you want to have that war chest so that when the market dries up, you don't have to stop painting what you love to do. You've got a little time to keep learning and learning and learning and growing, and you've got that little cushion. So, and because, I get nervous about stuff like that. So, and that's what we did for the first, I got to be honest, for the first probably 15 years, even when things were rolling for me and I passed her up 2, 3, 4 times, we still stuck to that plan. Matt told me later, he said, that was the best single piece of advice I ever got. Nobody really talks about that. There is a sort of a practical side to this. If you want it takes time to develop. Again, especially if you don't really have any training. Why didn't you have any training? Because all of the great art schools, by the time I got interested in this, had dried up. After World War II, it became the Express Yourself school. And nobody was really teaching drawing. Nobody was teaching traditional painting. And so you had to mine your own data. You had to go find the guys that were doing it. And I couldn't have been more blessed to have 3 of the greatest contemporary painters who became mentors, friends, started out as workshops. The first being in about 1986 was the great Jim Reynolds. Jim was the greatest painter I'd ever seen. I loved going to the Cowboy Artist Show. I loved looking at all the work, but Jim was a notch above everybody. And the fact of the matter was he could paint anything in any genre, and any museum in the world would kill to get it. He was that good. He was scary. He was about 6'6", very gruff, and didn't suffer fools. He was that kind of guy. But I took from him, I didn't know what he was talking about most of the time. But I can vividly remember, 10, 15 years later being at the easel and having it hit me over the head. An instance of a situation or a passage in a painting that he was talking about 20 years before that now I understand. Okay, now I get it. He wasn't so much a nuts and bolts guy, really, but he was fearless with the brush. He was beautifully trained. He went to the Otis Institute, I think, and Pratt maybe. So he was really well trained. Then he worked in Hollywood for a while as a set designer. But he had been at the top of the game for years when I first met him. And one thing I really remember about Jim was the fearlessness. He was working on a 1620 demo. And about 2/3 of this painting was an oak tree. Well, for some reason he decided that oak tree wasn't working and he scraped it off. And my jaw fell on the floor. He just scraped it off and had a completely different scene in about, 10 minutes. And I thought, boy, this is real confidence to be able to do this the way he could do it. And he could just wield the brush that way. So Jim was very generous. He was, I got to go and bring my paintings to him privately. The one thing that I do remember that I did do with him was I would never go back and see him until I had begun to apply the things he told me the last time, because his time was valuable. So I'd have an hour conversation with him, throw my horrible things up on his easel, and he'd go over them with me, and then I'd go home and work real hard for about 10 months, and then I would come back, and it went like that for a while. There was another painter by the name of Michael Lynch who I saw his work in Southwest Art, and I showed the article to Peggy. I said, if this guy ever comes up on the docket at Scottsdale Artist School, I've got to visit with this guy. I've got to take from him because he really understands color and composition, and he knows how to wield that brush. Well, I locked eyeballs with that guy. He happened to be teaching like just 2 months later. I signed up, and he's you know, I was just on the phone with him on the way down. He's one of my best friends in the business, probably the greatest outdoor painter I've ever seen. And he taught me, maybe you're getting the impression that I was a little uptight. And I am. I'm tight as a tick most of the time. And Mike taught me how to have fun. I was real frustrated that my work wasn't better than it was. I remember saying to myself and friends, I've never worked so hard at anything with so little results in my life. The sales were taking care of themselves. I wasn't so concerned about that anymore. I was concerned that these things weren't improving at the rate that I wanted to see. Mike taught me how to lighten up. And that's really important. As I said before, you know, if you're not having any fun at the easel, boy, does it show. And I just wasn't really having fun. I was beating myself up silly. And I can remember I was in the other room one time and Mike was visiting us. And he probably didn't know I could hear him, but he was talking to Peggy. He said, geez, I'm surprised Bill hasn't committed suicide. He's so hard on himself. And sometimes you need to hear stuff like that so you could just, you know, relax. You're 32 years old. You're not supposed to know it all yet. Anyway, Mike was a big proponent of working outside, which was absolutely huge for growth for a painter. If you want to learn, don't watch a bunch of videos. Don't take classes, you know, from people every 5 minutes. Get outside and work from life. It's just hugely important. It's the best classroom there is. And so, in 1982, I was walking out of the hotel in Flagstaff, and Earl Carpenter, who I had met, was walking in, and he said to me, "Do you want to be an artist?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, do yourself a favor. Leave the camera at home and go get yourself an outdoor easel and go outside and paint." And that was really, really good advice. And so, I don't know, I scraped up a couple of $100 and I went outside and painted. Fell completely on my, I had no idea what I was doing. But it was one of those situations, one of those aha moments where if it's that tough, if it's this hard, then it's got to be valuable. So I stuck with it, and I began to take and hang around guys that were doing a lot of that sort of thing. Not everybody would do it. I remember one time in Prescott calling somebody and said, "Come on, you want to go painting?" And he said, "What do you mean, like outside?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, you know you can't sell those." I said, "Okay." You know, I could tell I'm talking to a wall here. It was the best way to get good, and some people knew that, and some people were particularly or all in terms of the dollar aspect. If you're not going to make immediate money from something that you're moving brush on canvas, it isn't worthwhile. Well, again, this is a time investment. This stuff takes a long time. And I remember, I wish that I knew Bob Lockheed. I'm sorry to drop the name, but I remember him saying, after your first 1,000 outdoor paintings, you might start to understand something of what this is going to take. Well, that's a really helpful statement, because it tells me you're not supposed to get this right away. Ned Jacob was another huge influence on me. I met him through Mike, and Ned was the greatest painter from life of the figure that I had ever seen, and one of the greatest equine painters I'd ever seen. And he taught me the importance of painting the horse from life. I always did everything when I was painting outside as an exercise. It was always a means to an end. It was never an end in itself. That came later when you got really, really good at it, if you got good at it. My average outside now is not all that great. Maybe, Matt goes outside, my friend Matt Smith, he'll go out and get, 9 out of 10, are killer. I'm about 3, 4, will be worth something, and 3 or 4 will have 2 or 3 square inches of the truth in them that you can't get any other way, and 3 or 4 will be absolute scrapers, just get rid of them. But I just keep doing it as a means to an end because it teaches me massing, value, speed skills, all of those things that are so important once you get back in the studio. So Ned taught me those things, but what I was getting at with Ned was, Ned said something that also was an aha moment. He said, if this is easy for you, you're doing it wrong. Because this wasn't easy. This was really, like I said, I'd never worked at anything so long and so hard with what I felt were so little results. But things were progressing and they were going along, and all of that experience that I had outside began to pay big dividends back in the studio, because I would get myself outside in these horrendous messes that I just had to step back and rely on the fundamentals. Scrape this off, go back to drawing, composition, color, keep it simple and keep it direct. And when I would do that outside, those paintings began to speak, and they helped me problem solve. Painting is really just problem solving. So when I got back in the studio, and when I work in the studio, all that experience of moving the brush around outside and getting yourself into messes, having to step back, extricate yourself from the problem, go back to the fundamentals, was really paying huge dividends in the studio. So again, outdoor painting to me was a means to an end. And then, of course, the more you do it, the more addicting it gets, where you just almost don't even want to work any other way because it's so much fun, even if you're not getting a result. It would be frustrating. You know, early on when I was doing a lot of those things, they were all awful. They were just all just awful. And I was so driven that when I was taking the time to do that, and I would work like a dog and not get a result, I'd throw those things, or I'd break them over my knee or something like that. Well, that was a really dumb thing to do, because I can remember several times, later back in the studio, maybe months later, I'd working on a problem, and you know, this is the exact thing that I was tackling in that little outdoor study that I wrecked. And I don't have it to refer to, so I stopped doing that. I stopped just, you know, you have to put your ego in your back pocket and just realize, look, you're not a genius, you're not Soroya, you have to cut yourself a little bit of slack here and use these things for what they're intended to be used for. And so I started stacking those things up, and then they were there for me to refer to when I was tackling a particular problem in the studio. Actually, not really anything else is particularly interesting. I just kept working and painting, and I began to get into some of the really good shows, and the Lord just blessed this for His own glory. I've never really totally understood the reason, but you know, when I was, I can't, you know, you are not a congregation, and I'm not a preacher, but when I first wanted to get into this, I realized how hard it's going to be. And I was a new Christian. And I said, look, Lord, you're going to have to open the doors, because I'm kind of dumb, and I'm real stubborn, and I'll keep beating my head against the wall, and I can't put Peggy through this. Please close every door so I get the point that this is not for me. They just opened immediately, and I provided the elbow grease. He blessed the results. Where are we time-wise? How are we doing? Yeah. Anything anybody wants to talk about? Yeah.
Well, as you know, I find your work to be completely captivating.
Oh, thank you.
And I'm sure that's shared by everyone. But one of the things that is so compelling about your work is the light. And how, as an artist, because I don't paint at all, but how as an artist do you look at a canyon wall or a blue sky and say, that's going to be this color here on my palette? How does that transfer? It has to be a blessing from God, because I don't understand how it would happen otherwise. But you look at every painting in this room, and the light is extraordinary.
Well, I appreciate that. It is all about the light.
Could you kind of repeat the question so everybody?
Well, she wanted to know how I arrive at a color and how you sort of.
Yes, how you. I was asking him, how does he transfer what he's seeing as the light on the canyon wall or the blue sky? How does he pull that off his palette and make it a reality?
A lot of trial and error. You know, that's one of the reasons I work in oil, is because it's so malleable. And if it isn't right, I can scrape it back. You do this in watercolor, you're dead. It's one go, that's all you've got. And that's why I don't work in water. I make all sorts of mistakes, sometimes really dumb ones. For doing this for 40 years, you know, I think, how stupid can you be? But when I see something that I've done up there, and you start to wonder, do I really know anything about what I'm doing? But it's trial and error, really. You put it on, look at it, and make a judgment. Then you have to also realize that everything in a painting is relative. So even if it's the wrong color, if the value is right, you're on the right track. And you can make a painting almost any color as long as your value, your amount of light and dark tonality is on the button. But I would say that, in answer to your question, that working outside as much as I did was huge with that, because you had to learn speed skills, and you had to learn how to mix, put it down and leave it alone and look, and if it wasn't right, mix again and keep going it that way. And I've always tried to approach these studio paintings as if I was on a time clock, like I was outside. The faster I am, the better I am, across the board. And that just comes from working outside. But there is also great value to building these things up slowly. And I don't, early on in my career, I didn't have that kind of patience because I wanted to have an outdoor, immediate, spontaneous feel into all of these paintings. You hang around George Carlson a little bit and you look at those things that he's doing where they look like tapestries and weavings, and you cannot figure out how is he figuring this, because he knows on step 2 what he's going to be doing on step 50, and I've never been able to sort of do that. But there is great value in also building these things up slowly and laying one color on top of another and let them play off each other. But there really isn't any big secret. It's not a big secret. It's certainly not divine intervention. It's just working at it a long time and having the right, I think, mentors. Somebody said something really good to me a long time ago, and he said, look, if you want to progress in this, don't look at the contemporaries. Look at the guys from 50, 75, 150 years ago. Those guys they were beautifully trained. They didn't have all the distractions that we have, and they really knew their stuff. That's back when, if you were an artist, that was a big deal. That was a really big deal. And you had the training where you drew for 7 years before they even let you touch color. And then they might give you a red Conti crayon, and you could work in that for a while. And then when you got really good at that, then you might be able to pick up a brush. Today everybody's an artist, and it's plein air. Let's just go out and make some wild colors. So the whole thing has sort of gotten a little bit dumbed down in recent years, but so it was valuable advice for a kid to hear. Don't look at the contemporaries. Look at the guys from 1900 and thereabouts, and some of the work that was coming out. People like Heinrich von Sugel in Germany, and the great Frank Tenney Johnson, Edgar Payne, William Wendt, the California Impressionists were doing some of the greatest American I've ever produced. And it wasn't until after World War II that all of the great traditional schools just sort of went by the wayside, because modern art and abstract expressionism became the ticket, and that stuff just never moved me, never interested me. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm wondering how often you get to shows like at the Art Institute or something, like Sargent, Sorolla, some of those.
Yeah.
How often you get to them, how much you look at them, because I noticed in some of your paintings, when I went to a Sargent show in Chicago, I know, we're always taught you paint thin in the dark, thick in the light, right? That basically. But I noticed you had the same technique that Sargent did. If he needed a dark, he put it on thickly, and you've done that in some years, and it's like, wow, that's awesome. I could show you, I could point out some that you've done. I mean, I got to see. It's brilliant.
Yeah, I've never been compared to Sargent before. I don't know the answer to your question. I paint on these things till they look right to me. Sometimes there's a lot of guys that teach, and I don't teach, know how to break this down into nuts and bolts. And I've never been really very good at that. I keep working them until they look like they're right. And I keep working them until I'm no longer helping them. I'm making them worse. I do have a basic standard procedure that I go through, but I vary it every now and then. Early on I paid a lot of attention to the rules because I'm that kind of a person. I want to learn the rules, I don't want to just start breaking them. That's what drove the bus off the cliff with art, where everybody just started breaking the rules and doing their own thing. But it's great to break the rules as long as you know what the rules are. When Jim was teaching, I remember somebody came up to him and said, what if I do this kind of an approach with this painting? And he said, why don't you try that? Well, I remember listening. I was standing there and being really frustrated with that, because when you're young, you want a roadmap. I want to go to A, and I want to go to B, then I want C, and that'll lead me to D, E, and F. Well, he was sort of the experience school. Put it on there, give it a try, see what kind of an effect you get, and manipulate that around, and you'll learn something. Well, that's really the right answer, because a roadmap might help for some of the basics, but if you really want to start exploring this, you're going to have to start playing with it. And so that was a good thing for me to hear. It made me angry at the time, but that was the right answer. Yeah.
Would you tell us about the painting with the fire that's around the corner? Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, in 2013, Granite Mountain caught fire. I remember seeing the plume of smoke on the other side of the mountain, and I lived right at the base of it. And I told Peg right then, I said, it was June and the wind was blowing. I said, we're going to use the dining room table for a staging place because this is not going to end well. I could tell right then and there. And that thing came up to the top of the mountain and roared down the other side. I don't think the Forest Service could even believe what was going on. And that afternoon, I was evacuating horses and getting them out of there. And by the time I got back with the trailer, the fire department was there and said, you guys got to get out. That fire got within 300 yards of the house. And the really poignant part of it is that the first responders on that fire were the Granite Mountain hotshots. And they were all gone 2 weeks later in Yarn Mountain. Yeah. But they personally saved our house.
Wow.
Bill, you might explain the Granite Mountain hot shots. Some people don't know what they were and what it meant.
Well, it was just a sort of a crack group of guys that would go in on the front lines and hike into areas and start fighting the fires with everything that they needed on their back without water. I think largely just a lot of saws and things like that. And my friend Dwayne Steinbrink, I think, was responsible for putting that group together. And actually in Prescott, the wildland firefighting is pretty cutting edge. I don't know what happened in Yarnell. I'm not sure that we'll ever really know. But they were so successful on this fire, 460 properties evacuated, 460 properties saved. It was amazing. Not one, I think the biggest casualty was one of the guys got a bee sting. That was it. That was it. So that's what it looked like that afternoon. And just used the guys chousing some horses off of that plateau there as a sort of a metaphor for what I was doing that day.
Is there a process for you to sort of learn to paint cowboys, paint their way of life, to know what their thinking was, what their body posture, all that kind of stuff? Is that a big process for you?
Yeah, it is, and it's still probably the hardest thing because for me to do. I'm more naturally a landscape painter. That comes a little bit more natural to me. It never matters if you make a limb of a tree too long. Mm-hmm. It matters if you make a horse's leg or a guy's arm too long. So the drawing is really critical. Sometimes you want to do something visually that will be really exciting and fun to explore, but wouldn't happen on a ranch. So you're constricted a little bit by anatomy, and you're constricted a little bit by, you don't really want to have these guys doing something they wouldn't normally do because they're looking, they're watching. at what you're doing. And so I try to stay within the framework of what I know or what I've seen or what I've done myself, but I'm no cowboy. Does that answer your question?
How did you educate yourself about, what cowboys do on just a day?
I just started going out and riding, and I made friends with a few of them, and then I got invited out. I've been out to Marla's place riding with her son Lori. This is Marla's boy Chad, who was running the ORO at the time, and so I just got to be friends with them and asked could I come or got invited, and so I'd get out and ride with them. Yeah, that's how. Sure.
You're a great artist, you can see this, and you have a lot of history. Is there something that you find difficult even to this day when you sit down, whether it's composing it or painting it? Is there something that you're surprised at yourself that still seems difficult?
It's all hard to me. It's always been hard. One of the reasons I don't teach, one of the reasons I don't, lecture, is I consider myself a student. And I'm still trying to figure this stuff out. And I was telling Dan, it's really hard for me to go in front of a bunch of students and say, okay, listen up, this is how you do it. Because I'm not really even sure. I just do it until it looks right to me. I got a long way to go. And I'll run out of time before I run out of ways to improve. So I think, integrating the figure into the landscape is probably still the most difficult thing, and that's why I started painting horses from life, because that was the best way to figure out how to do that. Early on, my stuff looked stuck on, because I was painting the sky, then I was painting the background, then I was painting the midground, then I was painting the foreground, and then I was painting the figure. Well, you can't make the thing organic unless you start working all of these things together. You slash in that shirt, then I start cutting in with some of this stuff around here and redrawing the horse as I go, and while I'm doing that, that is going to relate to this, so I'm starting to paint this, I'm going into these horses, then I'm going back up into the sky, and I got that from Reynolds. He would work that painting all together, and when you started doing that, when you started drawing the horse by virtue of the background behind him, cutting in, things really started to get exciting. Yeah, so that was it. But I've never found any part of this particularly easy. Yeah.
If someone commissions a painting and then tries to tell you what they want you to paint, is that difficult?
Well, if they commission something, I'll only give them so much leeway. If somebody wants to commission a paint, I'll say, go to my website and give me 5 or 6 examples of things that really appeal to you. And I'll try, so I'm looking, do they want action? Do they want a night scene? Do they want cattle? Things like that. And I don't mind doing any of that. And the thing with commissions is, I don't take any money down and there's no obligation. Because I'm gonna paint something that I know I can give to my gallery, put in a show if the client turns it down. It's never happened, but it makes it really easy for the client because they're not under any obligation. But I try to find out what is their preference. But if they say, now I want a picture of me on this horse and I want you to take 25 pounds off me, nah. I'm out. Yes.
So I'm kind of new in the last 10 years of your paintings, but for the last 30 years I have 4 of your chalk, including the right-of-way.
Oh, that's yours?
No.
Oh,
no,
the print.
not the chalk, the clear charcoal.
It was actually pencil, yeah.
Yeah, it was a pencil.
Mhm.
So I have 4 of them, including an artist proof of one.
Uh-huh.
Do you still do that stuff, or is it strictly painting now that you do? And I love the paintings.
Yeah.
I can't afford them.
Well, thanks. I always wanted to paint, and I started with the black and white because people really snapped them up, and it was a way for me to get into this and start getting to know the market a little bit, and that's how I started with those black and whites. But then I went to pastel because I thought it would make the transition into color easier. It didn't at all. Horrible. I have no gift for pastel whatsoever. But there wasn't enough for me to sink my teeth into with black and white. And I felt I wasn't really approaching those things the way you should. Those are renderings. They're not really drawings. They're renderings. And I didn't want to just render. I really wanted to explore in oil, because there's so many more effects that you can get, and that's where I wanted to land. But there was a huge evolution with my thinking about painting and about drawing and about all those things as I did this. I became much more loose with the brush, and a lot more critical of what I was doing. I mean, I'm a complete pain to live with, because everything I've ever done, I think is like, you know, Peggy'd like to shoot me, you know, before every show, because I'm convinced it's the worst stuff I've ever done in my life. It's part of the deal. I don't know, it's part of the deal. I mean, in 40 years of doing this, I can think of about maybe 10 paintings that I've done that I thought, I really can't do any better than that. And the rest of them are like, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, I shouldn't have done that, I shouldn't have done that. That's just the way I am. But the black and whites didn't interest me. They didn't hold my interest enough to explore it any further than I did.
But the cowboys and everybody in the horses still look perfect, as it. I mean, in the black and white, they're just as beautiful as they are in their paintings.
Well, I appreciate it. Thanks.
So.
Thanks. Yeah.
Do you paint one idea at a time and stick with it till it's done, or can you do multiple canvases?
No, I usually work on one at a time, and take it till it's about 90–95%, and then set it aside, and I might start figuring out what my next project's going to be, and then I'll go back and finish that. Finishing is the hardest thing there is for me, because I've never found that the charm in any of these things is in the detail. It just doesn't, you know, the reins, the ropes, the bridles, the bits, all of that stuff, I find to be a little bit of a chore. And sometimes when I get used to looking at something without all that stuff, all that extra detail never helps the painting to me, but you got to include it because it's wrong without it. Yeah.
Technical question. What is your preference for paint? I mean, you know, if there's a certain brand, especially white, and brushes, what type of brushes? Do you have a preference for any?
I use a lot of flat brushes and a lot of filberts, but mostly I use flats. But I will throw anything in a canvas if there's a seascape over here that I threw as much paint in that water as I possibly could, and then I took tin foil and crinkled it up and threw it on the thing and pushed it and then ripped it off. And I wanted to see what the little peaks and valleys are doing, and I went back in and manipulated that a little bit. George Carlson takes a belt sander to him. He takes nails to him. Just really, just anything I can get that will get an effect that I might be interested in. As far as brands, I use Holbein. Old Holland, I'm sure, is wonderful stuff, but it's about $4,000 a tube. You know, it's just ridiculous. And I go through a ton of paint. If you saw the paint that I threw out at the end of the day, it's kind of disgusting.
But I guess I'm wondering consistency.
Yeah, you know, I don't know that much about. I had a guy write me one time from Hawaii. He said, you know, the properties of walnut oil and linseed oil, as opposed to the 50%. Look, you know way more about this stuff than I do, and you care a whole lot more about it than I do. I still go back to the fact that, you know, Russell painted stuff on tobacco kegs. You know, so your tools, are they important? They are. But people can get all wrapped up in that stuff and forget how to work hard, or the fact that they don't have any ability to begin with. So I don't major on that stuff. I use the best stuff that I can afford and I can get my hands on, but I don't have. I will say that Winsor Newton makes a really good burnt sienna. Holbein probably does too, but some of the other brands look like house paint. Burnt sienna is a beautiful color when made so that you can use it transparently. And so Winsor Newton's burnt sienna is really a nice thing. Other than that,
I guess I want to know with the white.
White, I use Holbein. I've used a lot of Utrecht titanium white. It yellows a little, I've been told, because the titanium white has zinc in it, and that's not a good thing, because it tends to be a little bit more yellow. But I just use the stuff that,
It's just that sometimes some are a little more slippery.
well, permalba, I remember, was like butter, like
Yeah.
melted butter. That was all over the place. I stopped
Yeah,
using
that's-
that.
that's hard to
But,
do.
you know, it also depends on the temperature in your studio. I've been painting outside when it was 8 degrees, and it doesn't matter what kind of paint you have, it's all gonna be like taffy. Yeah.
Can you speak to the ocean scene and the one down there? You've done a lot of landscapes, but I was pleased to see the horses coming up from the ocean. Where
Why
did
would, you know,
do
there's,
that?
yeah, there's ranching all up and down the West Coast. And, you know, the rip on Western art has always been, you know, it's cattle left, cattle right. And I just was looking for something to do that would be a little bit different, a little bit out of the ordinary, aside from the fact that painting the ocean is just so much fun. It's just fun to do. It's fun to do from life, and it's fun to do in the studio. And it really gives you an opportunity to rear back and let fly. So I started doing them because I find them interesting, compelling, and I enjoy doing them. And they're not inaccurate, and they're not something that you see very often.
Bill, could you, oh, I'm sorry, Bill?
Did you have one?
I did, just real quick. Canyon Rescue.
Yeah.
Just fantastic.
Okay.
Right, so what inspired that?
Well, I went down Hell's Canyon in Idaho with my son 2 or 3 years ago, and that country's just astounding. There's cliffs going down to the water and stuff like that. And I just remember, and there was ranching all up and down that area. Rough? Holy cow. I mean, you just can't even imagine anybody trying to eke out a subsistence there because the country is straight up and down. But they did, and I just wanted to set a painting in that area. And I love doing night scenes, and I thought, boy, that would be a fun one to do. A little bit of a story, and I don't do that many verticals either. And that country's pretty straight up and down.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of the things that you do that's unique is your use of the study. Could you
Oh, yeah.
explain how you use the
Yeah,
those?
sure. Some of the paintings in this gallery have the studies alongside them, and then there's about 20 or 30 of them over here. I found that to be really, really valuable to work out my ideas on a small format. I work from photographs, but I also work from sketches, and I work from memory, and you know, I don't have a photograph of this. I don't have a photograph of that, or really any of them. I've got bits and pieces in my files that help me go for correction and anatomy and stuff like that. So, but all of these scenes I've basically made up. So when you work that way, you can't look at a picture and say, that'd be really fun to paint. Because I don't have a picture of that. So I'm drawing from all sorts of sources. Some of these paintings, I probably used 10 or 15 different sources. When you're doing that, you don't want to get into a big canvas and find out, oh boy, I didn't think this through, or I don't have enough information, or I don't have the skill level it's going to take. So I worked up my ideas, first of all, on a little sketch pad, and I might do 20 or 30 of those. And if I like what I see, I'll put it up on a marker board and I'll do it full size. And if I still like that, then I'll take a little panel proportionate to the size of the painting that I want to do. In other words, if I want to do a 40-48, I'll do a 10 by 12, excuse me, or maybe even a little bit bigger, and find out if it's going to lay out the way I think it might. Because I can't, the other thing is, I don't really work with a computer. I mean, I'm stuck working digitally because everybody is now, but I don't prefer to work that way. So I don't have Photoshop where I can move this tree around and this mountain, take this guy. I'd rather just do it myself on canvas, figure out, is this thing gonna lay out the way I think? The other really valuable thing it tells me is, it tells me where is the trouble gonna come from? Where am I a little bit deficient in information? Where am I gonna have to invent color? You wanna know those things on a small scale, because you don't wanna get into a 30-40 or a 40-50 and find out I didn't think this through. That's not a good, I've done that before and wished I hadn't. So I like to work out everything small first and find out, is there potential here for a larger scale? And that's why I do those things. Yeah. And I keep them. I keep all those little studies.
Other questions? We're close to the end, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, anything else at all? Now's your chance. Yeah, go ahead.
Question. So do you always work on canvas when you do your studies, or what do you use?
Yeah, I try to work the same surface that I'm going to do the big one on. Yeah, so I just make up little panels. I think the one little study that you have that you actually got to have, which I don't sell, you know I don't sell those.
You told me not to tell.
Yeah.
You just told.
That's just the same material that I use when I do the big one.
Okay.
Yeah, always on. It's Clausen's, I don't know,
66
number
or something?
50,
Okay.
Belgian linen is what it is, yeah. It's
Okay, but
really-
your large ones, you stretch your linen? or-
I've never stretched anything in my life.
Okay.
It wouldn't be- But for one thing, I beat on these things.
Yeah, me-
And I would poke a hole straight through the canvas. Yeah. Now, really seriously, I would stab at these with the brush. And so it's got to have a good, solid, usually Baltic birch backing. And I affix that Belgian linen onto Baltic birch with an inert fabric adhesive.
Right,
Yeah.
okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Anybody else?
I was wondering, how long does it take you to complete a painting, say like that size or this one?
This one is so dirty and in such bad need of varnish. I'm sorry, I told the museum to go and get, it looks like there's a coffee stain dripping down it too. I took a feather duster when it got here to it and it was black.
No.
Yeah, so this whole thing needs to be cleaned and it needs to be revarnished. But at any rate,
We'll just take it off.
yeah. They take, as I said, the faster I am, the better I am. Sometimes the longer they take, sometimes I'm not helping them. But I am starting to learn the value of layering and let these things sit a while and look at them. And sometimes the time just sitting there looking at it is as long or longer than the actual moving brush, because there might be something going on and I can't, what? And you need a fresh eye. You come back the next one, okay, that's what's, I work with a mirror behind me because it reverses the image and any bad drawing shows up and it doubles the length of your studio. It's really a helpful thing. So. But
Well, Bill, you know.
I don't know, a major painting would take, it depends on how complex it is. If it's, this size, I think this probably took me 2.5 weeks or something like that. Something like that. Something like that. Yeah.
Okay.
In that range. I used to do an 1824 with figures in a day. And yeah, I wasn't getting everything out of it that I could have. And I thought pushing myself to that degree would get me to do that all the time. And I've looked at some of those things I did from that time frame. And yeah, so I'm taking a little bit more time. And now I'm taking a lot more time with them than I used to. When the first 25 years, I was producing anywhere from 40 to 50 a year. I'm down to about 20 because now I'm supposed to know what I'm doing. Don't know that I do, but I'm supposed to. So I'm trying to make them count.
So what's the longest you've painted in a day, hour-wise?
I don't know, 8-10 hours, maybe, But in the studio, that not all of that time is moving brush on canvas.
Yeah.
But it's up there looking at the thing and then, okay, I'm gonna redo this or I'm gonna get into this passage. And then of course you get into certain areas and you think, okay, now I've gotta get into the area that's right next to it because they have to relate to one another. And then once you do that, it's logarithmic that way. So you just stay at it until your juice runs out, or you got to be excited about it. If you're going to be working that hard and that long. But it can be exhausting, just exhausting. But that is unusual. I would say generally I'm in the studio, from 8 till 5 or 6 or something like that. Yes.
On that question, do you have regular studio hours,
Yeah.
Monday through Friday, Monday?
Well, early on I was working almost 7 days a week because I had to. just because I felt like, I got some time to make up. I remember my friends had called saying, yeah, meet us in Payson, we're going fishing. I said, I can't go fishing. I said, what do you mean? I gotta work. You're a painter. So I was very workmanlike, and I still am. You really have to be disciplined to do this. You can't, the more time you take off, and I don't like taking time off. I like to paint. I really love to paint. I mean, there really isn't anything I'd rather do. If I go on vacation, I might bring a fly rod, but I'm always bringing my paint. I always paint when I go somewhere. Sitting on the beach is not my idea of a vacation. Painting crashing surf at cliffside and stuff, that's my idea. Yeah.
Do you find that, when you paint something while it's still wet, you let it dry after a couple days and it seems to look a little different than when you thought you had it at a certain point, and it's like, looks different, sometimes better, sometimes worse.
Sometimes worse.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I've had days in the studio where I thought, boy, I did a great job today. And I walk in the next morning and go, what? Who was in here? Who messed with this during the night? So, yeah, that happens all the time. Still happens.
Yeah.
So, if I want those edges to be bleeding one to another and have a lot of soft edges, I have to work that while it's wet. And if I find that it's dry and I didn't get the effect I wanted, I just scrape it off and redo it.
Okay. We're getting the time sign from Natalie in the back. One last question?
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
You said at one point you had said like there's 4 or 5 picture or paintings that you felt like you had you were happy with. There was nothing wrong with them. Is there
Well,
any of those
I would
here?
say, no, I wouldn't say there was nothing wrong with them. I would just say I did as good as I could.
Okay.
And
Are any of those-
sometimes that's a floating bar.
Oh, okay.
You get into one level early in your career, and then you try to get everything at that level. And then you take that bar and you push it up. And you'll have 1 or 2 a year that'll come out that good. And then you insist that everything get to that level. And then you take that bar and you keep pushing it up. And then you might have 1 or 2 that reach that level. And then you want everything at that level. And then you just want to keep pushing the bar.
So are any of those ones that you felt like are here?
No comment.
One more?
Marlon.
Hi, Bill. When I was at your studio several times, and you have all of your horses from life up on your crown molding or whatever, and you walked me around and you would say, now see this horse, this is just garbage. It is no good at all.
Yeah.
But this leg is okay.
Yeah.
This leg
Yeah.
on this horse is great, or this hip.
Yeah, sure.
Do you ever go back to your studies and
Fix it?
just for an exercise, redo that
No.
horse?
No. If I do that, I might take that study down and repaint it. But I don't repaint those things.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
No, I don't.
Take it down and-
I don't, because a lot of those things are just meant for me to get some accurate color. I can think of one in particular where I dig my big bay horse, and he looks like a camel. I mean, his neck is so ridiculously long, it's just stupid. But the rear end is got some really good stuff in it that I can't, that I've never really been able to top. So I keep that around and I just leave it. And I don't necessarily look at them for the drawing, but I'll look at them for the color. And every now and then, one will come out where the drawing is good and the color is good. And the brushwork is good. Doesn't happen all the time, but all those things are meant as little, I might have 2 square inches of the truth in each one of them that I can't get any other way. Can't get it from a photograph, so I keep them around. And then, as I said, I learned not to throw out the disasters or the ones that I thought were deficient, because there might be something in that thing that's pretty darn good that you just were too much of a baby to realize at the time. Yeah.
Well, you would just point that out. This leg is just exactly what I want right here, but the rest of it is not. And
Yeah, and then, there's no thought to composition in those things. They're just, how do I get these things down? How do I draw this fairly accurately, hopefully with a little bit of caricature there's a difference between caricature and bad drawing. And get the vibrancy and the feel. The main purpose of doing those things is to integrate the animal into the background and to get the effect of sunlight on hide. That's what those things are for.
One last question
Yep.
from Rick McGill, one of our very best local artists. Rick.
This is all completely off the record. How are you dealing with your age as you get older in your painting?
I don't have the energy level that I used to have, and that's why I've knocked back, and I don't say yes to everything anymore.
Do you feel like you got a fire under your butt? You need to get going. I mean, are you being pushed?
By myself. Yeah, I push myself. Yeah, there's some young guys coming up that are really quite good, but my wife always tells me, don't compare, stop comparing. Well, that's hard for me to do because that's what I do naturally. That's just what I do. But has age affected me? I don't know.
If we look at history, a lot of artists, their age, whether their bodies start giving out.
No, I think right now, I'm never probably going to have better abilities than I do have, because I expect in 5, 6, 8, 10 years, they're gonna diminish, probably because of my eyesight. Will start to go a little bit. I mean, I did notice that in some of my mentors. Hasn't happened yet, but they usually say, 50 to 70, you're right in your prime as a painter.
Well, thank you very much, Bill.